in the 90s, there were so many films made about us and every experience we had. I wanted to explore, where we are in our mid-50s. As you hit that age, does anybody still give a shit? And if there is an audience out there, does anybody on the other side give a shit that can help me reach that audience?
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. In this episode, the many marital trials of a family of siblings play out in director Edward Burns' drama, Millers in Marriage. The film follows the Miller siblings, a former musician, a writer, and an artist, who all contend with challenging shifts in their marriages. As their lives change, their relationships are put to the test, bringing them closer to their partners or pushing them further apart. In addition to Millers in Marriage, Burns' other directorial credits include the feature films No Looking Back, Sidewalks of New York, and Newlyweds, and the series Public Morals and Bridge and Tunnel. Following a screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Burns spoke with director Doug Atchison about filming Millers in Marriage. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Thank you very much.
I wonder if we have any married artists in the house tonight who can relate. Mr. Burns.
Oh, hey, Doug.
How you doing, Eddie? I just was telling you, I watched the movie the other night, and I'm in the age range. I'm married. I'm an artist, and I was replaying lines in my head that night, having a hard time going to sleep. You have characters saying out loud a lot of the things that ricochet in our brains, because this is not just Millers in Marriage. These are three artists who are in marriage. It's a very specific conflict of, we have an impulse to create as artists, we have an impulse to create in a family and to connect, and those impulses sometimes are in conflict. What drew you to this? What drew you to these characters, and specifically making them three distinct artists?
So my producing partner, Aaron Lubin, who you know very well.
Yeah.
Anytime I get an idea for a new a script I want to write, a film I want to make, and I start to kind of play around with just a bunch of different ideas that popping into my head. So I had this notion. We were talking about being Gen Xers and the fact that in the 90s, there were so many films made about us and every experience we had, right? If you look at those films going from Linklater's Slacker to Reality Bites to Singles to my first film, Chasing Amy, go down the list, everything we did, our first loves, our first apartments, our first jobs, there was a movie where we could see ourselves up on screen and that experience being reflected back to us. Now that we're in our 50s, kind of like Ben Bratt says, we're invisible. You know what I mean? Like, our stories are not told in films anymore. I know for me as an actor in my mid-50s, and I know from speaking to this cast, we are now cast as plot points. We are allies and obstacles in most screenplays. Very rarely do we see the things that we're going through up on the screen. A lot of people ask, how did you get, all of these actors in a $6 million movie where everybody worked for scale? And one of them, I think it was Juliana Margulies, said, never underestimate an actor's desire to play a real person dealing with some real shit that you can relate to. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I started. I wanted to explore where we are in our mid-50s, and a lot of my friends are now empty nesters. So kind of that experience was a little bit of the launching off spot. But like you, and you're one of them. So many of my friends are in the arts. And as a lot of them are no longer working, or they can no longer get their films made or their novels published or their album produced. And I kind of wanted to explore, as you hit that age, some of my friends felt like, well, I don't know if I have anything left to say. And those that did felt like, well, does anybody still give a shit? And if there is an audience out there, does anybody on the other side give a shit that can help me reach that audience? So that was a lot of what was going on in my head. And, from that, I started to, I really started with Nick and Maggie and the idea of, I've written now a couple of times about writers dealing with writer's block, probably because it's our greatest fear, right? So I kind of started with them, and then I playing with that 90s idea, I had this notion of, Gretchen's character, an artist, in this case, an indie rock musician who had a moment in the 90s and it's gone. And is there a chance for a second act? And I really didn't know, quite honestly, what to do with that third sibling, with the character that I eventually played. It was an early draft where he was an attorney who didn't make partner, like an entertainment attorney. So he was sort of on the fringe in the business, but not an artist. But I quickly got rid of that. But given that I ended up with 3 artists, then the other thing was, well, why are they all artists? And more importantly, what is it about their very different personalities? What happened in that house or that apartment? And that's when I fell on this idea that the parents are musicians who traveled. And, to your question, right? We love what we do so much. It takes an obsessive personality to do this. And how do you balance a family while being an obsessive? And in the case of the Millers, clearly their parents didn't spend enough time with these kids.
Well, you're somebody that has been able to make that balance in your life. So I want to get to that in a minute, but you raise an interesting point. All of your movies, most of your movies, I think, they take place within the dynamic of the family. Yeah. And in this case, it's very clear that these 3 siblings didn't have a role model to teach them how to listen, how to support. Benjamin Brad says you're supposed to support your spouse, not undermine them, right? That struck me as the central theme of this movie. When you've got people who are really struggling, like Campbell Scott's character is in a lot of pain, right? He just needs somebody to listen to that pain without judging. It's very tough for these characters to do it. And it seems to me that you found in your movies a way to explore the themes of conflict and love and jealousy through the family dynamic. What brings you back to the family every time?
I mean, we joked a little bit earlier about just, making my first film, Brothers McMullen, for $25,000. Before I even wrote the screenplay, I listed the things that I could get for free. All right. And it was the house that I grew up in that my parents still lived in. And because of my experience working on a news crew in New York in the early 90s, I knew that you could shoot in any New York City park without a permit. So if you watch that film, again, you'll see that those brothers never take their girlfriends on dates to a movie theater or to a restaurant or to a bar. They're in Central Park after they've seen the movie, or in Washington Square Park after they've had their date, as a way to just, make the film as cost effectively as I could. So, but part of it is, I still make, modestly budgeted films. And I think the kitchen sink drama comedy is the most inexpensive movie that you can make. But that's only part of it. Part of it is, when I was a kid in film school, the movies that I fell in love with and the movies that I aspired to make were, films like Bogdanovich's Last Picture Show, and that great scene with Cloris Leachman and Tim Bottoms in her kitchen after he's come back, after he's broken her heart. And it's just the two of them sitting against the wall in the kitchen. That is one of my all-time favorite scenes in films. I mean, Paul Newman and Patricia Neal in HUD, and some of the dynamics around that kitchen table. I can just go on and on. Those are the moments that just excited me as a storyteller and a filmmaker. And I've got, I've not maybe there's one movie I made that isn't a family saga, but for the most part, who knows why we go back to this thing and why you keep scratching the itch.
Well, I also think that, I mean, for me, you're the quintessential independent filmmaker that came out of my generation because you have stuck to your own terms in making your movies. They're personal. They're things that are vulnerable that you care about. And I think that's why you keep coming back to the relationships that are important to you. So I think it might be interesting to just talk a little bit about your trajectory as a filmmaker and then how you got this one made, because you made McMullen. This is Eddie's 14th movie, right? Eddie's 14th movie. As a writer-director, not counting the ones you've acted in, not counting the 2 TV shows that you wrote, produced, directed, and starred in. He just wrote a novel. So you've been an incredibly prolific artist, despite the vagaries of this business, and a business that contracts and expands and tries to tell you what you can and cannot do. You've always done things that you've thought were important because you've discovered, hey, if it's important to me, it's probably important to a lot of people. And you figured out a way to do it. How has that journey been? I know there's sometimes you haven't had the money you've wanted to do to make a movie, but you've kept doing it. How have you done it? And then how'd you get this one made?
I got very, very lucky with my first film, with Brothers McMullen, right? I mean, after the movie was, I won't give you the whole long story on how I got that film financed. And we made the film over the course of 8 months. We shot 12 days. We did it for $25,000. It goes to Sundance. We sell it to Searchlight. It wins the grand jury prize. Now, granted, that was, 4 years in the making, but to most people, it looked like an overnight success, right? But the great thing that happened was I really got to cut to the front of the line. Right. I had never been to LA. I'm flown out here and I'm kind of wined and dined by all of the studios and agents and managers. And I quickly get my second film. She's the One made. That movie does really well as well. But then, my third, fourth, and fifth movies don't perform as well as those 2. And I find myself in probably 2002 with a new screenplay that I can't get financed. So I write another screenplay. We can't get that financed. So then I think, maybe I've got to change up my genre. So I thought, well, I'll try and make sort of a, I loved Soderbergh's Out of Sight. So kind of Elmore Leonard-esque kind of, funny-ish crime film, like maybe a Get Shorty, another one I loved. And we thought we needed about 15 for that. That quickly dropped to 10, to 8. And eventually the budget was down to $2 million. And I had a meeting out here with, let's just say like a guy who's definitely not even adjacent to the business, like really fringe and really sketchy. And, he had a woman in the meeting who he wanted to cast as the lead actress in the part. And Aaron and I left that meeting and we were like, what the f has happened to our career? Quite honestly, it was like we were in director's jail. Like you could feel you couldn't get a meeting anymore and you couldn't get a film financed. So we went to the bar at the hotel I was staying at. And, we were just trying to figure out, well, what do we do now? And we kind of thought back to McMullen. And I was like, when I wrote that script, I was 23 years old. I had no connections in the business. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't know how to make a movie, how to cast a film. And that was my most successful film. So on a napkin at the bar, we wrote down, McMullen 2.0. And we said, we're going to make a movie for $25,000. We're only going to use free locations, 3-man crew, has to be shot in 12 days. And that's what we did. We made this movie called Nice Guy Johnny. And it wasn't a big hit, but it played in enough film festivals and got enough good reviews. And we made actually some money on it. So we're like, well, let's try that again. So we made a movie called Newlyweds. And Newlyweds ended up being the closing night film of the Tribeca Film Festival and made a lot more money.
Terrific movie if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, if you haven't seen that one,
it's a wonderful film.
And then a year later, again, and so we're not even in the business at this point. Like we are still outside of the business. We didn't even come to LA to try and raise the money. These movies were all made for $250,000. And we just stayed in New York making these little indie 3-man crew films. And then the third one in 3 years was a movie called Fitzgerald Family Christmas, went to the Toronto Film Festival. And after being completely out of the business, in 3 years, we made 3 films for a total of $750,000, did the whole festival circuit, and now you're kind of back. And you start getting the incoming calls. And that's when I did that first television show, Public Morals. And that kind of...
And if you haven't seen Public Morals, an incredible achievement of yours, acting, directing, writing, producing every single episode. It's a work of genius. And even though you say I was out of the business, look, in this day and age, independent filmmaking is an entrepreneurial thing.
Oh yeah.
Right. The business is wherever you find somebody to pay for the movie. Right. And so coming to this one now, and I am going to ask you about this incredible cast, was part of getting it made, finding this incredible cast, these folks. I mean, how did we get to Millers in Marriage?
It came about in an odd way. We had met through another film that we sold our foreign rights to a guy named Dan Cohen at Paramount. We just started this shingle that made this film, Republic Pictures. And Dan was looking for sort of modestly budgeted, $6 million films that might have some international appeal. So I had a script that I was almost done with, which was called Finnegan's Foursome, about another family, an Irish family that take their grandfather's ashes back to Ireland to be distributed on a couple of golf courses that he grew up playing on. I won't give you the whole story of that. So we're set to make that movie, and then the strike happens. All right. So that movie has to be shot in the summer because of the weather in Ireland, and it takes place on golf courses. So we had to push that movie. And now, like everyone else, I'm looking at, I'm not going to make any money for 2 years now if I have to wait another. And I had a version of this script that was 5 years old, because this script was born out of my first attempt to do a sequel to Brothers McMullen.
Aha.
Yeah. Okay. That's where the 3 siblings were. And the initial idea from, McMullen was a comedy. So my thought was, and it's funny how my process is, there's no time spent working on any of these things that's really wasted time, because they end up informing the next piece or a piece 10 years later that you don't anticipate. Right. Only reason I was looking back at some of those early notes, and the idea was I wanted all 3 of the brothers to be in relationships or married to women who were doing better than them in some fashion, because I thought that would play for comedy. I ended up using that in this film, in that Maggie is more successful than Nick. She's the best-selling author. He's kind of lost his way. Gretchen tells Patrick, I was always more talented than you. All right. So I like the idea of the more talented. And then with my character, the idea that those 2 characters, Minnie and Moreena's characters, are more satisfied in their work. I like the idea of, my character, and there was a scene that was cut that kind of went into my character a little bit more, but he's grown apathetic about his work.
And those 2 women are not artists. So he's actually not connecting with somebody that could at least understand the struggle that he's having. The other characters might not be responding the way we would like, but they can understand. These 2 really can't connect to what he's going through.
So how this project came to be. So that failed attempt on McMullen. Oh yeah. So I have this old script, and it was a little different in that it was exploring, because I wrote it 5 years earlier when I was turning 50, what it's like to be in, hitting that threshold moment, like turning 50, and kind of the dynamics of a marriage then. So after the strike, I said to Aaron, we got to make a movie before next summer. What's an old script that we have that was pretty good? And he had read this. He says, this is the one we have to do. So I quickly looked at it, and I recognized, now as I'm moving past my mid-50s, a lot of my friends who are empty nesters, we have a couple of friends who had gotten divorced once the last kid went to college. I was like, I know how to rewrite this script in a day, basically. You know what I mean? I know what it needs to be. And I did a quick rewrite of it and we gave it to Dan. And Dan was, like their deal is like get a couple of names in the film. They don't need to be massive stars, but enough to help sell it overseas. And we got very lucky in that we put together a cast that blew him away. He's like, this is more than we ever could have hoped for. And I said before kind of how each one of them came about. I'd worked with Patrick years ago and we hit it off and we always said, if I have the right thing for you, I would love to come back to you. And there was another actor. When I gave him the script, there was another actor attached to play the part I played. Mm-hmm. And I was going to play Nick. And I give it to Patrick to read the part of Andy. Okay. When the other actor drops out, I thought my part was a little better. I don't know that he wanted to play the jerk. I said, hey, take a look at the part of Andy if you're interested in that instead of the artist instead of the jerky manager. Mm-hmm. And he was like, absolutely not. He goes, I've never gotten to play an asshole. And I can't wait to sink my teeth into that. So
he does.
Yeah. And then Gretchen was a similar thing. We sent the script to Gretchen. I've always been a fan. It's like, whatever part you want, you can have.
Wow.
Yeah. And she read the script and she said, I want to play Eve. And then, I had several long conversations with her. It's so much so that, my approach with actors has always been, once they're on board, the character is theirs, right? They're always going to know that character more intimately than I can because as a filmmaker, you have so many other things that you have to worry about. Where are we going to put the camera? What color is what are we going to do with the wallpaper? Mm-hmm. So I would always encourage them, if there's a line or a moment or a situation that you don't buy, given that you now own this character, please come to me and let me know. And, especially with the actresses that I've worked with, I was like, and sometimes I'm like, I'm a 55-year-old man writing for a 28-year-old woman. Like, this is just a roadmap. Like, feel free to change any line of dialogue as long as we end up from A and we get to B.
And do you rewrite at that point, or do you let them exercise their muscles on the set? Is there?
No, I don't tend to do a lot of improvising on set. We'll do the improvising because we make these films so inexpensively. We have shorter schedules. We shot this film in 20 days. Me and my DP kind of do like a pretty detailed shot list. We know what we're going to shoot on the day, and I typically do about 3 takes. That comes from. And I know I'm all over the place, so forgive me, but that's just how my brain works.
No, because you're actually getting to, I think, this is the DGA. We want to talk about technique. Yeah. Working with these incredible actors and getting these performances, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
To hear how you did that.
So, when the first film that I acted in that wasn't one of my films was Saving Private Ryan. On that film, I asked Steven, I said, and I'd never been on a movie set before, other than my little indies in New York. I said, can I take this opportunity to just kind of shadow you and kind of watch, how you make films?
What a film school. Right?
Well, that's what it was. It was the ultimate graduate film program. He said yes. And for 66 days, that's what I did. And one of the things that was amazing was, the first week we worked together, there was obviously a big ensemble. We were running and gunning, shooting, sometimes 4 cameras at once. And Stephen would do 2 takes, third take, he'd be like, great, we got it. Let's go, moving on. And after a week of this, all of us, the young guys in the cast, were starting to think, well, he must really hate us because he's not giving us any notes and we're definitely going to get fired on Friday. That was our fear. The following Monday, we go to work and we have a scene and he asks for a 4th take. And a 5th take. And then he starts giving us notes. And then finally, when we're done that day at lunch, we said, hey, Stephen, we got to know why today? Like, why today did you have notes for us? And he said, today you didn't know what the hell you were doing. So I had to step in. And he went on to explain, I hire actors for a reason. I assume you're going to show up prepared. You're going to have thought about the choices you're going to make. You guys are an ensemble here and I'm rolling 4 cameras at once. So I need to give you guys the time to figure it out. If I were to step in after the first take and give you a note and you a note and you a note, as young actors especially, that's going to get into your head and undermine your confidence. Right. So from that experience, I know like on my first couple of movies, I thought directing meant that every time you said cut, you went up to the actors and had to give them notes. You had to be directing them.
Mm-hmm.
After Private Ryan, I was like, 3 or 4 takes, you do what you have to do, figure it out, and then I'll step in. So when you've been doing it for 30 years now and you're working with a cast of like professionals like this, I mean, really the only notes I would ever give on this film are kind of like that Clint Eastwood. I don't know if it's a true story. The first time filmmaker, when Eastwood walked out of his set and he's like, hey, Clint, so I got a bunch of ideas for this first scene. And he's going into his thing. And apparently Clint said, hey kid, there are 4 notes you can give me. Louder, softer, faster, slower, right?
Yes.
I don't know if it's Clint, but that's how I heard it.
I know Gene Hackman would often, what I heard, tell directors, if they were new directors, if they would try to give him a note, faster, slower, louder. Softer.
Yeah.
That's
So whoever it is, it's great advice. And that's really all I had to do on this film. The other thing that I was saying before about sort of, encouraging them to change anything that didn't feel honest or didn't feel like something that their character would say was, Gretchen has a great moment in this film at the end where she comes over to Juliana's house. And after we did the 3 takes and I felt like we had it, I asked Gretchen kind of played with one of the lines. I was like, that instinct you had there, like, let's just do one, just go off there. And that's that take, which wasn't scripted, where she talks about, I thought I had more to say. Mm-hmm. I was more than doing drop-offs and cooking meals for the kids and all of that. And another moment like that was the final scene with me and Minnie Driver, where she says, I deserve better, right? I went through the shitty marriage. My kids are great. I deserve to have fun. That wasn't what I had written. And before we shot that scene, she said, hey, I want to talk to you. That paragraph, I kind of rewrote it because you said we should, if we, if we felt, we could do something more honest. And she read me what she wrote. I was like, that's 1,000 times better. That's what we're going to shoot. So that's what we shot in that scene. So
Steven Spielberg wasn't acting in Saving Private Ryan. There's another level of what you need to do. And so I was watching the scene, and I know you get asked this all the time, but it's really fascinating for fellow directors to figure out how you do it. The scene where they're all at the dinner table, right? And it's a lot of people there, and that's a complicated kind of thing to cover, right? A lot of, Juliana Margulies is having that eye interaction, and you're sitting at the head. And I said, Eddie's fully in character here. And there's a lot going on in this scene. Is there a temptation to come out of character? Or are you able to just compartmentalize in that moment and trust the machinery that you've set up to do it? It strikes me as something that, like when I'm running lines, my wife's an actor, when I run lines with her, I'm looking at her. It's very difficult for me to assume the character, but you do it very naturally.
Thank you. I would say scenes like that, I mean, if you look at the films where it's a bigger ensemble scene like that, I always position myself sort of out of the main group of it. Okay. And that's the last bit of coverage I do first. So while the scene is going, a lot of the times, I'll have a little monitor in my lap while also acting.
Wow.
Yeah. Which isn't great sometimes for the other actor, maybe. But, so I am, and a lot of times, and I'm sure you've done this where an actor does something that you like in the middle of the take, I'll be like, Minnie, do that again. Oh, whoa, that was funny. Can you try one where you say this? So I'll constantly be doing those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And I save my coverage for the very end.
Okay.
So that after I've gotten sort of all the pieces, and I feel good about the scene, then we'll come around on the coverage that's sort of facing in my character's direction. But I've always looked at it like, if you, let's say played sports like basketball, right? There are moments where on the court, the team just gels. and you're just aware of it. And it's just like you hit the flow state as they talk about it. You know, if anyone plays music, you know, I used to be in a band, and there was a kind of unspoken communication that could have when you know, did a time change, or, you know, you would hit a pocket. And even though you were focused on playing, and the singer was focused on playing and singing, and the drummer's drumming, keeping time while singing a different melody, you all kind of looked at one another like, oh, we're in it. When you finish a great take with a bunch of actors, everyone on cut were like, that's the one. So you know it. So if I'm acting in a scene with you and we've done 5 takes, and that 5th take, we both feel the thing.
Right.
Because you do feel the thing.
Right.
Then you're like, that as the writer, director, actor, I know, you know, that's the take that I'm going to want to circle and use.
That's got to be exciting.
That's the best. It's the absolute best. Yeah.
I want to ask you a little bit about, we're talking about family, and you've had like a family of filmmakers. You've mentioned Aaron.
Yep.
I think you've worked with your editor for quite some time.
Yeah. Janet Gaynor, my editor, I've worked with her since 2003, I think. There's
complexity in the timeline of this. Was that entirely scripted, or was some of it discovered in the editing? You know, what was that? What was the editing process like?
Both. It was scripted. The idea of sort of that's the first time I've really used a non-linear storyline. And that definitely came from writing the novel. Right. The novel kind of opened me up to, because I'm pretty, you know, disciplined in a 3-act structure. I just kind of like that style of storytelling. And now I know it so instinctually that after writing the book, I kind of fell in love with sort of being able to play with the form. So with this script, when I don't think that original script that I wrote 5 years ago had that. So I definitely wanted to play with it. The thing that was interesting was, in the editing room, Janet would have these moments where it'd be like, hey, so this is where that scene is scripted, but look what happens if we move it here. And when you get a little bit of information at a different point, like I believe when Moreno's character asks me about, do you want to have a child? You know, and my character says no. Like, we move that scene around, and depending on where we put it, you felt completely different about, you know, our relationship and those characters. So there were, and again, it's too far back. I'd have to look at that original screenplay, but there were, you know, an interesting one that came up. We never wrote the scene, but in the beginning of the film, you know, you meet me and Minnie Driver first, and then Tina shows up. Okay. And I bring this up because while making the film, you know, a lot of the crew, I have my crew that I've been working with, you know, like Will Rexer, I've been working with for 25 years, my DP, or the DP that I use. And, you know, so like on set, this is the first one I made where there were so many debates about who was in the right and who was in the wrong in all of these scenes. I think because a lot of the people are our age. Some of them have been divorced. Some of them are dealing with an ex-husband or a new girlfriend who's jealous of an ex-wife and that kind of stuff. So we had this thought about if the movie opened instead with Tina at that bar with her girlfriends, and she says, I think I made a mistake separating from Andy. And they say, his apartment's 2 blocks away. Why don't you go up there and surprise him? Hit the buzzer. And she's like, well, I still have the keys. Why don't I sneak up? And they're like, yeah. And you should open up a bottle of wine, get a glass, and sneak into bed with him. How great would that be? And then if Tina went in there and she goes to surprise the guy that she feels badly about separating from, and there's another woman in the bed, how does the audience feel about Minnie then if they've come to know Tina beforehand? Instead, we play with it differently, and that completely changes how everyone feels about those two characters. So those were the kind of things that in the editing room, we started to play with. Like, how do you manipulate an audience's allegiance to a character based on when we give them that information? So that was fun.
Editing is like writing the movie all over again.
Oh, so yeah.
And you've written and directed and edited a terrific movie. It was a joy to watch.
Thank you.
Thank you for making such a thoughtful and mature film. And I can't wait to see the next one.
Thank you very much. Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you, Doug. That was awesome.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. The Director's Cut is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And please share, subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America.